Hello, everyone who's just joining us now for our webinar today, Better Gardens, Better Soils. My name is Scott Ensign. I'm the Assistant Director at Stroud Water Research Center, and we'll pause just for a minute and let our other attendees join. I see we have 39, 40, and more coming online, so we'll just pause for a second and let a few more people file in. Okay, it looks like we've got a stable number of attendees, so welcome everyone. Again, my name is Scott Ensign. I'm the Assistant Director at Stroud Water Research Center, and I'm very pleased that all of you could join us today for this very exciting webinar. And to get us started, I'm going to introduce Lisa Blazier, who is Stroud Water Research Center's Soil Health Coordinator. And Lisa is going to be our MC for the day and introduce our guest, Kevin Brown. So over to you, Lisa.
All right, thanks, Scott. And thanks for all of you for joining us today. I want to also give thanks to our sponsor of this program, Solitude Lake Management. And Scott, if you could advance to the next slide, please. Our mission at Stroud is we're all about freshwater systems. So we're been around for over 50 years to advance the knowledge and stewardship of freshwater systems through many avenues, through research, education, and restoration. So at Stroud, we realize that the health of these stream systems is largely influenced by land management in the watershed. So for several years now, we've embraced soil health management as an effective, low-cost way to achieve those water quality goals. And it's a win for the farmers because it's building their soils. It's a win for the environment because we're reducing runoff off these farm fields and cutting back on fertilizer usage. And it's a win for human health because foods and crops that are grown on healthy soils have higher micronutrient densities and higher protein levels. And what's really unique about these soil health principles that Kevin's going to talk about today is it works at any scale of farming, from a couple 1,000-acre crop farm, all the way down to a small scale backyard garden. And I know for several years with my raised beds in my garden, I've been following these principles of soil health, and it's working really well for me. So I'm excited to hear what Kevin's got to share with us today. So Kevin's got that unique combination. He's good technical knowledge, and he's able to combine that with kind of hands-on common sense practicality. He grew up on a dairy farm in Bradford County. He graduated from Alfred State College with animal husbandry degree, and he spent a lot of years working in the dairy industry selling feed, and he's been at the Bradford County Conservation District now for about 8 years. I've known Kevin for several years now. He's curious by nature. He's really embraced these soil health practices. And he's been able to get involved in some unique projects there at the district. So he was a critical player in helping them purchase a piece of farm equipment called a highboy interseeder, which is used for planting cover crops into standing cash crops. And then also involved in this no-till gardening concept. So welcome, Kevin. We're happy to have you here with us today, and I'll turn the program over to you. We can get your share screen going.
Okay. So can you see that?
Yes, I can see it on my end.
Okay. Okay, so welcome everybody. That was a really good introduction for somebody that probably is one of maybe the least technical and maybe the least educated on the whole program here, but it's been a lot of fun anyway, and so I'll share my viewpoints and we can talk about things from there. So how did I get to where I'm at right now? Lisa mentioned a lot of this. When I first started here about 8 years ago, NRCS had what they call a soil health initiative. And this soil health initiative really focused on, obviously, soil health. And soil health is, you know, living, breathing organisms and water infiltration and all this. And so on production ag, typically what we're going to be looking at is cover crops and no-till are the two big ones. And I'll get into a little bit more of the pillars of what soil health is a little bit later. But so this picture here is kind of what we were always shooting for. This was one that we did with our high boy interseeder. We went into corn that was knee high early in the year and put down some annual ryegrass. And when he harvested the corn as silage, the interior he was going to harvest as grain, the exterior he harvested as silage. And so after he took the silage off, the annual ryegrass that had already started there really blew up, and we got a really, really nice stand of annual ryegrass there to hold the soil together. So that's kind of how I've arrived at this point. And, excuse me. And so what we're trying to get away from or trying to fix would be soil that looks like this, right? So we have soil that's very stratified, it's very compact. If you look at, and I haven't done a lot of this, so I don't know if you can see my mouse and stuff, but if you look at some of the soil here, it's sealed right over the top of. And so if rain is to hit this, or if this is your garden and it's raining on it, obviously that rain is going to hit this soil and it's going to run right off, which not only creates flooding problems and issues like that, but also you're not getting the water where you want to get it, which would be into the soil, where it can help your garden and help your wells and all that. So this was in one part of the field where the cover crop did not grow well. This is in another part of the field where the cover crop did grow well. And so now you can see a lot better soil, right? You can see it's got the cottage cheese kind of texture to it. It's got little heads, for lack of a better word. Again, people can talk about glomulins if I'm pronouncing that right. You've got root structure in here for microbes to feed on, earthworms to feed on. You've got pores for air and water. You've got a lot of good things going on here. Where again here, no pores for soil, or I'm sorry, air and water, and it's just a really compacted layer of dead soil. So I was going to schools and trying to talk to them a lot about this whole soil health initiative. And I would ask in this classroom how many people were from a farm. And obviously that gets to be a less and less number every year. And so I was trying to figure out how I'm going to bring in the rest of the world into the farming community, just so that we can show you what we're attempting to do to make soils better, to reduce flooding, to have better water infiltration, less erosion, help the Chesapeake Bay and all that. And I wanted to touch as many people with that message as I could. So as my program evolved, I started talking about gardens. And of course, everybody has a garden. So now I could relate, these kids could relate to me. So I started talking about gardens. So I decided, well, maybe I need to look into gardening a little bit more. Obviously, like Lisa said, if it'll work in production ag, it would probably work for small garden scale operations too. So we had a local guy in the community that had been doing this for a number of years. And my supervisor said, I'll bet if we get a hold of him, he would help us promote this, and we could go to ask him questions, and we could really, get on board and make this work. So I called this guy, and we struck up a conversation, and we started talking about no-till gardening. Now, no-till gardening, again, for me, for Lisa, for Stroud, we're looking at clean water, right? And we're looking at soil health, getting the water into the soil, not having runoff, not having erosion, all that kind of stuff. excuse me, the nice thing about this no-till gardening is that even though we're going to do a lot better with all of those things, the nice thing that comes to the homeowner, as you've already read, is right, there's no weeding, there's no rock picking, there's no watering. There's really not much of anything. And so that's why even some of my program here, I started with, how I got to this point, because it's really simplistic enough that there's not going to be a whole lot to my talk. There's just not a lot to do. You plant it, you harvest it, and you mulch it for next year. And in parentheses, keep the deer out, because that seemed to be my biggest issue when I started this thing. And so I didn't want to even build a fence, but I eventually had to at least do that. So, so what are your goals? And I'll just read these over quickly. I'm sure everybody else is reading them too, but people have different goals. My goal for this was twofold. One was to show people what modern agriculture is doing in order to help some of the environmental conditions out there, and with flooding and erosion and stuff like that. And the second thing was kind of just to prove that you could have a really nice garden with literally almost no work whatsoever. When we get into some questions and answers, you're going to find out I am not a gardener. I'm not even going to pretend to be a gardener. The first article that I wrote for the newspaper, my mom called me up and says, "Why on earth is your name associated with a garden? Because you've never wanted anything to do with a garden." And nothing could be more true. I have never liked gardening. But if I can garden with no rock picking, no weeds, and no watering, and I can just plant and harvest it, then I'm good with that. So again, it goes back to what your goals really are. There are people that take pride in having the quintessential perfect garden, right? We want perfect rows. We want beautiful plants, beautiful garden plants. We want no weeds in between. We want nice bare soil that shows that we've really done our work and we've got all the weeds picked out of it. Some people even, relax in the garden, right? You go there for some quiet time. Maybe you like picking weeds. You want to get away from, whoever in the house is there that you want to get rid of. It's your quiet time. I'm going to go to the garden. I'm going to relax. I'm going to tell you right now that if that's what you use your garden for, you're not going to like this way, because you're never going to have to go there to do anything. So again, what are your goals? I've heard people describe no-till in general as messy or dirty. It just doesn't look, again, like the quintessential garden. And that really bothers some people. I had a school teacher one time. I was given a program, and it was an outdoor program. She walked by. She was taking some pictures. She walked by, and so I yelled to her and asked her how things were going. And she said, "Oh, they're going good." She said, "I listened to your talk last year." And she said, I really want to try this. So she said, I went home and I jumped right in, and I did a no-till garden. I mulched it, and I even went to the ends of putting a pollinator mix around my garden to attract pollinators. And I said, well, that sounds really good. I said, well, how do you like it? And she said, I had the best garden I ever had. But when she said it, she kind of hesitated, and she was a little, you could tell she just wasn't completely happy. So I kept asking her questions, and finally I'd asked her enough questions. I looked at her and I said, it's ugly, isn't it? And she, she kind of just looked off to the side, and she's like, yeah, it's ugly. As human beings, we're just not used to the way this kind of a garden looks. So again, I go back to your goals. If you want to have the quintessential garden with bare soil in between, and nice looking rows of corn and beans and whatever, this is not for you. But if you are looking at some, and maybe that's what I've got here next, if you're looking for helping the environment, Mother Nature, healthier soils, I think Lisa alluded to this. Might be the next one. There's actually some research out there that shows that if you grow these plants and produce in healthier soil, you'll actually have healthier plants. So you're going to have more vitamins and minerals in that plant because it is grown in good, healthy soil with lots of organisms and lots of biology going on in there. So if you want to have healthier produce, then this might be something that you would be interested in. Another thing that I've likened tillage to is a Category 4 hurricane, right? So when we till, and I hope nobody takes offense to this, but when we till, we destroy everything. There's good soil structure there, there's good roots, there's all kinds of biology that have made their homes in there. You know, they've kind of set up shop, so to speak, and we come through with a rototiller, and it's like a Category hurricane going through there and just destroying everything. And so if you do it once, you've destroyed everything once. They slowly start coming back in. They slowly start getting things built back up again. And if you rototill twice a year, guess what? Here comes your rototiller again, right down through the middle of it, and you destroy everything all over again. So eventually, you're going to have a lot of these microorganisms. You've either killed them, or they're just like, I'm out of here because I'm not going to keep going through this, and they leave. And again, these microorganisms are really super important to the way things are getting done. So the pillars of soil health: keep it covered all the time, keep living roots growing in it all the time, diversity of plants, which in production ag sometimes can be a little bit of a problem or a challenge, right? Because we're doing corn and soy, and maybe that's all we're doing. But in a garden, this is not such a big deal because we're always planting all kinds of different plants anyway. And the last one is do not disturb. Again, going back to no-till. All this is helping with soil structure, is helping with OM, stands for organic matter. We're adding in organic matter. We're giving food to the bugs. Now, in case I forget later on, and Lisa can help a little bit with this, I'll put her on the spot when she wants to chime in, but the way that I have done our garden up here has been with dead organic matter and dead mulch, hay and leaves and different things like that. You can also do it with living organic matter, which would be planting a fall cover crop, and then going from that fall cover crop and then rolling that down and going through that. That is a little bit harder to manage and a little bit more work. And again, I'll go back to what I said when I started this thing is I want a garden where I don't have to do anything with it except plant and harvest, because I'm not a big gardener. But so I am missing the one pillar of soil health, right, is keep living things growing in all the time. I might not necessarily have living things growing in all the time. So I could do a little bit better job maybe than what I'm doing. So again, the quintessential garden, right? We've got nice rows of everything, and we have just bare soil all the way around it. And a lot of humans, you know, are going to look at this and go like, wow, that's a really super nice garden. And it is, but I will tell you that there's a pretty good chance that this soil in between here is completely lifeless, completely dead. And I challenge people, even when I'm giving a school program, I challenge them the next time you go out and water your garden, I want you to really, really, really pay attention to where that water goes. Because I think you're going to find that most of that water, especially after the first 2 or 3 times of doing it, is hitting soil that has sealed itself off, and the majority of that water is running right off of that garden and running into the surrounding area. So even the water that you're watering that you're doing is not getting where you need it to get to. And that's why I got to water every 3 or 4 days, or, you know, maybe this year's every 3 or 4 days or something, because the water you're putting in just isn't getting where it needs to be. With the soil health principles, that water is going to get down in there where it needs to be. And even as dry as this year was, you know, we never had to water our garden. It just doesn't require any. The organic matter in the mulch keeps it in, and when you do get some, it runs down through, runs into the soil, and you can dig that up at any time during the year, and you'll find really moist soil underneath there, no matter what the weather conditions are. So the first year that we had one, we went back and forth as to whether we were going to put one in or not. And finally, around June 15th, the district manager says, I've got somebody to come help you put this in. We need to get it in. So we started way behind. We started on June 19th. And, you know, no preparation for this, no anything. It was just like, Kevin, you need to get this done, and you need to get something put in. So I did. We went out to the middle of the lawn where I had mowed just the week before, and we got some old baled hay, a round bale of hay, and we scattered that around 6 to 8 inches deep, and we started planting in it. So you can see lots of lawn around it. I did nothing for soil prep. I did nothing for anything. I rolled a bale of hay out. We shook it out. We had planted stuff so that there are, again, if you can see my cursor, there's walkways up and down right here and over here. And we planted plants in 3 rows in the rest of the garden. And that's all we did. And we just walked away. Again, just some more pictures. There's some lettuce and some cukes. Peppers down in the middle. Some cabbage. So again, after probably 2 or 3 weeks of picking plants up off the top of the mulch and replanting them, because deer would come in and they would just grab a hold of the plant and pull it up out of the ground, and then they decide they didn't like the taste of it, so they would just drop it. So the next morning I would come out and plant 5 plants back in, and then I'd come back the next day and do the same thing. I finally had to put up a fence to keep the deer out. You can see that there's quite a bit more growth to these plants at this point in time. So we're talking, you know, probably mid to late July, and I have done no weeding on this at all. Now, again, you can see a weed. There's one down here next to the cabbage, you know, so there is occasional one that will come in, but essentially no weeding, no watering, no anything. I was just keeping the deer out. Some of the tomato plants, I did try to do a little bit of a string lattice, I guess you'd call it, which didn't work very good. But that's what the tomato plants look like. You know, the end of the year, this is what some of the cabbage, and I think maybe even some maybe Brussels sprouts. Again, I'm not going to pretend to be a gardener, because I'm not. I did this to prove other points. But again, just to show how easy it is, you still, if you look between the rows, you cannot see any weeds at all. So again, no weeding, no watering, no rock picking, no tillage, you know, no nothing. I went in, I planted, and I walked away. That's again kind of the end of the year. Again, you can see our walkways, and no weeds. Not sure how the brown-eyed Susan or whatever got in there, but it did. We had some zucchini and stuff up here, but just whatever I planted come in pretty good. So considerations, permanent walkways. The person that my mentor that I went to, he is really, really, really big on permanent walkways. You need to set up walkways and have them so that you can reach clear across each row from both sides without ever having to step into those rows at all. He's really, really big on compaction. Personally, I don't think it makes that big of a difference, but I will leave it up to you guys and how you want to approach that. I believe that the soil is probably in good enough shape that me stepping on it is not going to cause a whole lot of compaction, so I'm not that concerned with it. But he was, so I throw that in there. Get started in the fall. I was just talking to Jessica just before this meeting started. You know, right now is the time to be getting this ready to go for next year. So this is literally, except for planting, this is your only work period that you will have in the next 350 days is getting it ready right now. Again, maybe plant a pollinator mix around it. I have not done that. I think that's a great idea, and I'm hoping that maybe at some point in time we'll actually be able to do that. You can add any organic matter to it. Again, the mentor that I have, you know, he takes a bunch of food waste out there and puts into it. You know, we've used lawn clippings. I've used compost material. I've used hay and leaves. You can use anything. The only thing I would caution you on this is that going back to my production ag stuff, there is a lot of information out there on the carbon to nitrogen ratio. And the higher the carbon, the more nitrogen it will tie up during its decay. So that would be like straw and sawdust and some of the harder things like that. Now, I will tell you that if you look on the internet or if you talk to enough people, you'll find that there are people out there that are using every single one of these. There's people using sawdust and debark and recently chipped up trees. I mean, there's people out there using everything and it works. I'm not going to pretend to understand why that is. All I would say is until you're 3 or 4 or 5 years into this, I would be using something with a low carbon to nitrogen ratio. So it would be the lawn clippings and some earlier cut hay and some different things like that. Now, I think once you get into it 3 or 4 or 5 years, then you can start adding in the really high carbon sources because you're going to have enough nitrogen that's being released by the previous years that it may not affect what's going on at that point in time. But again, if you look on the internet, you'll find people using all kinds of chipped up trees and trees and sawdust and all kinds of stuff. And most of it works extremely well. But if I were you, I would at least start with some low C to N ratio stuff to begin with. Again, if you're skeptical, just try a small portion of the garden. I try to tell everybody, don't ever change everything that you do all in 1 year, because if it doesn't work for whatever reason, it's not good. So just try a small portion. Try some flowers. It works in a flower garden. And maybe most of you guys out there might maybe even do some mulching of some flowers. It works the same way. I mulched around. I have a flower bed planted along 2 sides of my garage. So one of those sides is under the eaves. And for years, I tried to put a gutter system on and then drop it down the drop tube. And then I was trying to figure out how to get that to just flow back out onto my flowers where I wanted it. And then one day I thought, why are you going through all this trouble of doing that? If you put down some really good organic matter, and I used wood chips for that. If you just put that down and let the water fall off the roof right onto those wood chips, it's already where it needs to be. And those wood chips will keep it from eroding. So you fix your problem and you can take all that gutter system down and not have any issues. And that has worked extremely well. The other interesting thing is that because, and Lisa can vouch for this, no-till is never mud. It's never a muddy mess. It's always firm. And because of the organic matter, there's always a good, clean walking surface. So, it could be raining, it could be pouring rain at the time you want to go out and check your garden or do whatever, and you'll be able to walk around on that without any problem at all. One thing I might caution somebody on is if you're going to transition from a tilled seed bed, I think that is something that you don't want to do the spring of when you're going to try to do it. And I don't know if I put in something here. No. So when I'm in a classroom setting, I can ask questions and get feedback. I can't do that here, so I'll kind of just walk through it. But if you go in and rototill your garden and you do a really good job of it, what do you have? You have pulverized soil, right? It can be dust even. There's just nothing left of the structure. It's just pulverized soil. So if you take that pulverized soil and tomorrow it rains, what do you have? Well, now you have mud. Then the next day, the sun comes out and it gets really hot and it dries that out. Now what do you have? You have bricks of mud that you could probably chisel out of there and build a house out of. It can get that hard and get that sealed off. And so if you've done that this year, go out in your garden right now and stick a shovel into it and start moving it around and stuff. And you're going to find that it lacks those air gaps. It lacks those pockets for water. It may still lack roots already. It may be really compacted. And because of that, you can't just start next year by not doing anything this fall, go in next year and just say, I'm going to plant in that and I'm going to mulch it and everything's going to be fine. Because those roots and stuff have to grow through that and you have no biology there to help it. So if you're going to do that, at least you need to start in the fall and you need to get some good organic matter on there. My mentor puts on about a foot deep of good heavy hay in the fall. And you get that on there and that will call in the microbes, it'll call in the earthworms, it'll call in everything that it needs. And hopefully by next spring, you're going to have a bunch of that stuff there to help you break up that that soil so that when you plant those plants in there, they can go ahead and start growing easily. So I would recommend, don't go from a conventional tilled seed bed into this no-till garden just at the drop of a hat next spring. Maybe it'll work, I don't know, but I just know that you're gonna have some really hard, thick, heavy soil that roots can't penetrate very well if you do that. So I think there needs to be a little bit of a transition time. Issues that are ever brought up. Everybody likes to bring up slugs, especially in production ag, but even in gardens at times we'll hear, well, you're gonna have all kinds of slug issues. Slugs are one of those things, again, I'd ask Lisa, but everybody likes to bring them up, but we almost never see them. There are some producers that have had issues, especially in production ag, and it seems to be those same producers every year. So I'm tending to think it's more where they live and where they're planting stuff. I don't know if it's alongside of the river, so there's lots of fog that's helped. I don't know what it is, but most generally people do not see this as being any kind of an issue, even though, again, everybody likes to bring it up. Weeds, okay? If you see weeds in your garden doing it this way, the only thing that means is that you didn't put enough mulch down. It degraded enough over time that the weeds could see daylight and they started growing. That's all it means. So you can either pull a few of those weeds out, cut them, you can just knock them over and just put mulch over top of them and they'll go away. There's a number of ways to get rid of them, but weeds are never an issue doing it this way. If they are, you haven't mulched heavy enough and you just need to mulch heavier. Two quick things. Again, mice have been brought up a lot. To my knowledge, I've not had any problem with mice. I've not ever seen them there. So the only thing I can say there is we do have, I know tomatoes last year, if I let them go to ripening completely before I picked them, something was starting to eat the bottom side of them. And so all I had to do was make sure that I picked them, a day or 2 or 5 days before they were completely ripe, and I never had a problem with that again. But if you let them completely ripen, there was something there that was chewing on them a little bit. I'm going to assume mice, but I don't know that. But that's the only issues I've ever seen with mice. I write down community gardens, not maybe that a community garden is an issue, but sometimes having a community garden and getting enough people to do enough work in them and keep coming back so that by the end of the year it still looks like a garden, at least in my neck of the woods, has been an issue. And so I raise this no-till mulch gardening style issue with people that are trying to do community gardens, because if it's done correctly in the beginning, like this fall, if that person never comes back, guess what you have next fall? You have a bed that's really well mulched and there's no weeds, there's no, it's not a weed bed, it's nothing. It's just been pre-mulched for you. So maybe it is a good way to get a little bit more buy-in with some of the community gardens if you're having a problem getting people there and getting enough work out of them to keep them going all year long. So facts, again, usually I ask these questions, not so good in a setting like this, but I'm going to talk for a few seconds just to give you guys some time to think about this. How many organisms are in 1 teaspoon of really good soil? I'm not talking about dead, lifeless dirt. I'm talking about really good soil. And I'll ask kids this question. There's probably plenty of you people out there at Stroud and stuff that know this answer. Most people will not get it. They won't even be close. And so then I'll ask them how many people live on the face of the planet. And I'll take answers anywhere from 7 to 9 billion. And then I'll say, okay, then how many organisms are in 1 teaspoon of really good soil? And guess what? It's that. It's 7. There can be 7 billion organisms in 1 teaspoon of really good soil. They're working for you if they're there. If you've tilled and you've killed them all, and now you have 1 or 2 that might be helping you out. Earthworms are a great thing. Earthworms are your biggest ally. So the one thing I do again is challenge people to go out and dig up your soil. Don't let me try to convince you of all this. Go out and dig up your soil. Look to see how many earthworms are there. Look to see if there's structure to it. Water it, and then stick a shovel into it and see how far in that water went. Guys are getting 5 to 8 inches of infiltration per hour on some of these fields. And a lot of tilled ground, you know, it's less than an inch. So it makes a huge, huge difference. This is more for production ag, but 1% increase in soil organic matter, so that's SOM, soil organic matter, can hold 25,000 gallons more water per acre. So it should be fairly easy, especially gardening this way, to raise your organic matter in your soil at least 4 points, I would guess, at least. So you're talking 100,000 gallons more water. Well, yeah, 100,000 gallons of water more per acre that could hold. So that's pretty good. So this is us getting our garden ready after the first year. We did a little bit better job with it the second year. We put down some horse manure first, and then we put down the hay on top of it. And then we're done. It's just that quick, and it's just that easy. Now, I will say, if you caught it at the very beginning, can I stop this? So if you caught that at the very beginning, you'll see that when I say you can put any organic matter down, we actually we don't clean the garden every year either. All of the plant material, and I've confirmed this with my mentor that's helping me with all this, any organic matter, any plants that are there from last year's garden, all we do is either cut them off or knock them down, and we put the hay right over top of them. They're good organic matter, just like hay, just like straw, just like leaves, just like anything else. So there's no cleaning to it. You just knock them over and you pile the hay on top of them, and you're done. The next thing really quick, now this again, a little more production ag, but on your right, you're gonna see where we've done no-till corn silage with a cover crop. And for anybody who knows anything about soil, the soil type is a Volusia, which is a heavier, poorer drained soil. But even though it's poorer drained soil, it has no-till corn silage and a cover crop on it. On the left is a pope soil, which is probably one of our better soils in Bradford County. But it has minimum till corn silage in it. And so we have a rainfall simulator. So this thing in the front, this container in the front is going to simulate what's going to the stream. So we take these stainless steel pans out and we hammer them into the ground, and we take these big clods of soil up out of the ground, and we take this rainfall simulator and we pour water on them to simulate a rainfall. And you can see in a hurry what the differences are there. I mean, it's just absolutely mind-blowing if you've never seen this happen before. And so again, think of what, you're out there with your hose, or maybe you have, one of the self-watering things for your garden. But as you're watering that garden on your left, all that water is running off and going somewhere else. It's not going into the soil. Whereas on the right, it's getting down in there and it's getting down into where it needs to be. So huge differences depending on, and again, the soil on the right should be much worse soil for water infiltration than what's on the left. And you can see it's a lot better because of the way that we have managed it. So huge, huge differences in soil based on how you manage it and nothing else. So again, I think I had a few of these. So what does your garden soil look like? Where are you in the process? So, and I don't necessarily mean what you can see above the ground, right? Get a shovel out and dig into it. How many earthworms are there? How many other insects are there? We didn't talk about smell. For anybody that has smelled really, really good earthy soil, it has a really good, deep, rich smell to it. And most of our garden soils, I'm sure you could dig some up and, there's just nothing there. Nothing is going on. There's no smell to it. There's no life and biology that's making that smell. Again, next time you go out and water it, watch to see where the water really goes. Is it really going into the ground? Get your shovel out again and dig it up. How far into the ground did that actually really, really go? The guy I'm working with also says experiment with things. He took a metal fence about this big around, and he filled it right full of wood chips, and he planted tomato plants into it. Now, the experts would tell you that's never going to work. You know, you're not going to grow a tomato plant in a pile of wood chips, and it looked fantastic the day we were there. I don't know as I can explain it. He couldn't explain it. You know, there should be tied up nitrogen. It should have all kinds of problems with that, but it looked fantastic. Raised beds. The only thing I bring on this is a lot of people, when they can do a raised bed, they want to put a big sheet of plastic or landscaping material down and build a bed on top of it. Well, if you do that, now none of this biology can get in, because you put that plastic or that landscape fabric down and nothing can get through it. So I would argue that you would have a lot better plants and maybe a lot healthier plants by doing something to allow that biology to come up into that raised bed. It can only help you. And I guess I'm done. So I guess we can take some questions.
Yeah, Kevin, that was great. I love those videos that you shared at the end with us. We do have quite a few questions that came into the chat box and the Q&A. There seems to be several questions that are relating to the use of hay versus straw as the mulch, and if you've had any issues with weed seeds being within that hay and then having some weed problems.
So excellent questions. So again, personally, I would lean to hay because it's lower carbon to nitrogen ratio. So I would prefer hay, at least for the first couple of years. There's people out there that tell me that they use straw just fine, and maybe they do. I would just worry about that carbon to nitrogen ratio. Now, if you wanted to use straw and you're not opposed to some fertilizer, you could add some nitrogen to that to make up for what that crop is tying up. So that's another way to kind of get around that. But it seems like everything works. And I hate to say that because it sounds too good to be true, but it has. And as far as weed seeds go, and that reminds me another weed thing I wanted to hit real quick. So as far as weed seeds go, weed seeds have to have good soil to seed contact, and they have to have light. So if you have this mulch in there that's deep enough, so let's say it's at the minimum it's 4 inches, but usually it's going to be maybe closer to 4 to 6. Okay, if the weed seed has good soil to seed contact, it's way too deep. It can't germinate. It just can't. And if it's higher up in that layer of hay, well, then it doesn't have good soil to seed contact, so it can't germinate. So if you have enough mulch in there, there is no way for that seed to germinate to ever get going. It doesn't have everything it needs to go. Another quick thing about seeds that we learn in no-till just really quickly is, seeds can only germinate like 3 to 5 times the thickness of the seed. So if that seed is something you can just barely see, it can germinate in the soil about 5 times that thickness into the soil. And I'll just make this really quick. If you rototill every single year you have a brand new weed bed. So you're battling every weed that's in that top 1/4 to 1/2 inch. If you do no-till, even without the mulch, the first year most all those weed seeds are gonna germinate and grow. And after you kill all of them, you can mow them, spray, I don't care what you do. Once you kill them all, guess what you have next year? You have a whole lot less weeds because you didn't disturb it. And then by year 3 or 4, you have almost no weeds because you haven't disturbed that soil again for those weeds to ever be able to germinate. So just by elimination, you're going to have less and less weeds every single year but the second you stir that soil, you're right back to square one.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. I've got one more question that kind of keeps on that weed theme. The example where you started with that section of your lawn where you maybe already had established weeds within that lawn, was that a problem for you with already established weeds coming up through the mulch?
No, it really, I know it sounds too good to be true, I do, but weeds are just not an issue. The only time they'll be an issue is if you don't have enough mulch. The only thing I had come through that at all was that there were actual blackberry briars in one corner of that. And, that's a pretty tough weed that can germinate and can grow from, a lot deeper into the soil or into that mulch. And so I will say that a couple of them came through, but I literally spent less than 15 minutes that first year weeding anything. And I don't know if I spent even that this year weeding anything. So it is just, it's hard to believe, but it is not an issue. It just, if it is, you don't have enough mulch, period.
So in that example where you started in the spring, we have a question of how many days passed between when you laid down that mulch layer and then when you started planting?
Yep. I think ours was 2 days. You could do it immediately. There's no reason not to do it immediately. I think because of help reasons, just who was there and how much time we had and stuff. I don't think we did it the same day. I think it was 2 days later maybe, but no reason whatsoever you couldn't lay that down. And remember that I'm not going from a previously tilled garden in that situation, so I could get away with doing it that quickly. If you were transitioning from a conventional tilled garden, I'd be a little nervous about that. But if you think about a lawn, it's always covered. It always has a living thing into it. It isn't disturbed. It has the perfect soil already there. So you could literally put that hay on and plant immediately.
Excellent. All right, so we have another question in relation to what you said about not cleaning up the garden and just leaving that organic material in there. A question about tomato blight. And if you do have some blight issues in the garden, should you still be leaving that residue in and mulching over top of it?
Right. So first of all, I'll go back to I've said it a couple of times, I'm not a gardener and I'm not even going to pretend to be. The guy that has mentored me through this thing, I think the one time we asked him that question, he did say, you are correct. If you have a plant that really has any kind of a disease on it, yes, you're probably better off to at least take that out of the garden and put it somewhere else. I don't know if it would make a difference, to be honest with you, but why take the chance? So yes, if there's some kind of a disease already in there that you know of, I would suggest, yes, that you probably go ahead and remove that from ever being a problem again and getting it out of the garden. Yeah.
All right. We have two questions that are fairly similar. Does this method of gardening, does it favor established plants that are transplants, or how well does it work with direct seeding with those small seeds and getting that seed soil contact?
Right. Yeah, so that is an excellent question. And again, remember that I'm the lazy gardener, right? I want to have a garden that I can go out and I can pick stuff out of and I can eat, but I really don't want to do any work to do it. So I have always started with established plants. The guy that helps me out, what he would tell you to do, there's a couple different ways that you can do that. He would either, make sure I'm on the camera here, he would either pull that mulch back, like if it's a row crop that you're trying to do that with, he would pull that mulch back down to soil, and then he would put the seed, like if it's a big seed like corn or something, you could plant that right into the soil. But if it was a small seed, he would scatter those seeds out on top of the ground, and then he would take maybe some peat moss or even a little bit more soil and sprinkle on top of that, and then take that mulch and just kind of semi cover it, like you want that stuff to grow through that. So don't cover it too much, but he would cover that just a little. The other thing that he said you could do, again, starting from the same place, is pull that mulch away, put your peat moss down first, or some soil up to the level of the mulch. So now you're on top of everything, and then plant those seeds into that mulch, into that peat moss or into that soil on top of the ground. So seeds are a little bit, I shouldn't say they're more difficult. I've not ever done them, but yes, you would have to, again, seeds can only germinate, 3 to 5 times the thickness of themselves into the soil. So you're going to have them on top of the soil, and they're going to have to get enough daylight to be able to germinate and grow. So however you can do that to not get them too deep and to have them open to sunshine. So that will require pulling back a little bit of that mulch. Yes.
All right. Excellent answer. Thank you. And then we do have a couple questions coming in relating to cover crops. So I'll let you take first shot at this, but I'm happy to jump in and share some of my experience as well. But
Before
if you do
before I get into that, can I let me see if you have anything to add to the one question that wasn't asked, just really quick, and I don't know how much time we have, but is using live cover crop for gardens, and it can be done. Lisa has experience with it. If we don't have time now, you can contact her. You can contact me. I do have another guy that did experiment with that. The only thing I would tell you is that killing that next year, especially without any chemicals, in our experience has been a little bit tricky. So it can be done. It may even be better for the soil, but it does require a little bit more of knowing what you want to do with that. So I will just leave it at that. If you want to add something, Lisa, you can. If not, we'll just go on to the next question. But it can be done with living cover. It just might be a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. I'll share my experience too, Kevin. It's going to depend on what species of cover you choose too, right? Because there's certain plants that overwinter and survive until spring, and then there's other species that winter kill when the temperatures drop. So oats are an excellent, anytime you can get oats in your garden, they do phenomenal things for the soil. So oats would be a early fall seeded, but they're going to winter kill, and then you don't have that issue in the spring. The radishes, anything in the brassica family is going to winter kill. So you can be selective if you're concerned about spring management. You can be selective with the species that you choose, and plant species that would winter kill. I do both. I like to do a mix in my garden. So I have some that'll establish quickly in the fall and then winter kill, but then I like to also have something living going into those spring early months to capture that sunshine. So a lot of times that's going to be your cereal rye or your wheat that will survive the winter. Some of the clovers will as well. And the technique, and I actually have some photos that I can share too, but I do not use any herbicide sprays in the spring for my garden. I've got 4x8 raised beds, so it's very easy for me to get along. I use hedge clippers, like those big long scissor blade kind of hedge clippers, and I'm going in right at the base of those plants and just clipping them off right at the base and then laying them down, and then that acts as my mulch in the spring. So that technique of manually clipping those covers in the spring has worked well for me.
And you have to do them after they've headed out, correct? Or close to heading?
The longer you can let those mature, yes, the better kill you're going to get. If they're still young, you're probably going to get some regrowth issues, and you may have to come back another time or two to clip them. But in my experience, I'd say probably 75 to 80% of them, I'll get a good kill and they won't sprout back later in the season. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see what else we've got.
A couple questions on cover crops.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you monitoring that Q&A as well that you can pick through?
I'm not.
Okay. We do have one question about using the manure as a layer. So how old is the manure? Is it important to have a more composted manure? And where would you recommend folks getting both a source of manure and hay locally around them?
So yeah, so I don't think the, how old it is probably really affects things. If you get really scientific about it, and I realize that Stroud is a scientific organization, so maybe some people do, they're probably, more of a composted stuff would maybe be a little bit more readily available early on. But, we use fresh manure for everything farm related pretty much. And, that grows fantastic crops too. So I don't see where one is going to be that much superior to another one in either one of those cases.
All right. We had a question come in and addressing where sources for manure or hay.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. The nice thing about hay, I'll tell you, is that it might be nice to have, especially when you're starting out, a little bit less mature hay, but I don't know if that's a huge deal breaker. And so, any farm, any auction place, again, we brought up this weed question, and that's what people get all nervous about is, oh my God, it's going to have weed seeds in it. And just let me tell you, it just doesn't matter. So, if you looked at when I showed that video of us getting ours ready for next year, it was moldy. I think the first or second year it had, it already started rotting, it had like slimy stuff in it, and it just doesn't matter. So if you can find a farmer, a horse farmer, like I say, go to Tractor Supply, in season, sometimes they have hay. You could use straw. Manure, a great thing, at least from what I've seen in my area, is a lot of times horse farmers, they probably don't spread their manure like maybe they should. So they might have a pile of it somewhere there, and it might even be composting. So, try a local horse farm or something. But yeah, anybody that has animals, farm animals, is going to have hay and manure. And even if they won't give it to you, they probably know where you could get some.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the value of horse manure, because a lot of those folks do kind of just windrow those piles, and it could be partially composted, like you said. That would be a good source if you've got some neighbors with horses.
Yep.
So referring back to some of the bugs and the microbes in the soil, we have a question that came in about sow bugs, or those pill bugs, and if you've found them to be harmful to the plants in the garden at all.
I'm going to plead the fifth on that one, because I maybe Lisa, but I have no idea on that one.
Yeah, I think they're more decomposers, typically of more of the older dead residue. I know in my experience, I haven't had any issues with them in my garden. I do have a little bit of. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to jump to slugs
about that whole biology is that what most people don't realize is that, and maybe Lisa has the number here, but to every single harmful insect or bug out there, there's like 375, or it might even be higher than that, number of beneficials. So what people don't realize is we get hung up on that one negative one, but if we bring in that whole world of bugs, they'll take care of themselves. And so typically what happens, and Lisa knows this a lot from slugs, is most people have problems with slugs because they use an insecticide that kills all the insects that kills the slugs. So you use an insecticide, now you have a slug problem because the insecticide doesn't kill the slug, but it kills the predator of the slug. So I would say another comment to that question is that because you bring in that whole world of biology, unless something is out of whack, you're going to bring in many more beneficial bugs that are going to keep those problem bugs in check. And so typically you should have less of an issue doing it this way than if you were doing it other ways where you might eliminate some of those bugs.
Yeah, I would totally agree with what you just stated. And that mulch layer provides excellent habitat for those beneficial insects. And Kevin was talking about the slug control. Anytime you find those shiny black beetles, those are ground beetles, and they are excellent predators for slugs. So definitely foster and create an environment that harbors those good beneficial insects. I see a lot more spiders in my garden. I've found praying mantises around my house this fall, and I'll carry them down and put them in my garden, so that diversity of plant species, that providing that habitat, as Kevin said, really helps to build that natural pest control and predator control in those garden systems.
I dislike spiders probably as much as anybody does, but as human beings, we do need to get over that feeling that like all insects are bad, and like you said, foster that environment and bring as many insects in as you can, because again, there are so many more beneficial ones way over what the bad ones are. And so they, again, in the context of of a normal situation. They will all take care of themselves. And so don't run around just killing every bug that you see, because most of them are beneficial. And the more you have in your garden, the better it's going to be honest with you.
All right, we are closing in on the 1:30 hour. We do have a couple more questions that maybe, Kevin, do you have some time to stay on to answer some more questions?
I do,
after we formally
stay alive, I'm good. Yep.
Okay, close out the program. So I want to be cognizant of all of your time here. I'm going to turn it back over to Scott. Scott, if you're still there to kind of close out our program. But once again, thank you to our sponsor, Solitude, for this. And I'll turn it over to Scott, but Kevin's able to stay on the line for those of you who also have some time to answer some more questions.
Great. Thank you all for joining us today. And again, stay put if you want more Q&A with Kevin. Just wanted to say thanks to Kevin for joining us today. This is a great webinar. Lisa, thanks for leading. And also wanted to give a plug. If you'd like to join us again at the Stroud Center for the world premiere of Flow of Life, it's a documentary about the Stroud Water Research Center. Please go to our website and register for that event, which is next Friday. So thank everyone for joining us, and I'll turn it back over to Lisa and anyone who wants to stay and continue with the Q&A. Thank you.
Yep, thanks everybody. Yep, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Kevin, you're able to see the Q&A board as well. We've had a couple
So I just
questions.
need to click on that.
Yep, it should pop up
Yep,
for you.
Yep.
All right.
Okay. Yep.
We've got a question. Any tips for dealing with cabbage moths on broccoli?
I'm not, I hate to keep falling back on this. I'm not a gardener. The only thing I've battled so far has been cabbage worm. I think they call it cabbage worm. That's the only thing I've had to battle so far. So I apologize. I can't speak to that really now.
Yeah, and I don't have any experience with that either, but I'd encourage you to reach out to your Penn State horticulturalist that covers your county. And I think probably the Penn State Extension horticulturalist could give you some guidance on that as well.
And I do have access to the mentor that I keep talking about. I don't really want to give his name for a variety of reasons, but if you call me, I can get you in touch with him. He's done this for many, many years, and he probably knows all kinds of stuff like that. So if you want to contact me directly, he has no problem with people calling him. I just don't want to give it out on a format like this. But he would have no problem with you contacting him. So we can do that also.
All right. And I'm also going to look through the chat, Kevin. We got a couple questions that came in.
Okay, I do.
We got a question about jumping worms. Do you know anything about jumping worms?
Yeah, I've heard of them. Nope, I don't. I think they're a good thing, right? I believe, and I've heard of them, but I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
I really did, while she's looking at the other questions, I really did do this because I wanted to prove that you could have a really nice garden without doing a thing. So I am the lazy gardener right to my core. And so a lot of these things I don't know a lot about because I haven't had the issue, and hopefully I'm making it as easy as I can. But yeah, go ahead.
Can you maybe expand a little bit about rototilling and kind of re-emphasize how that changes the soil? But we have a question. What about rototill when some is used in a very small vegetable bed, maybe 8 by 12 foot vegetable bed?
So say that again one more time, Lisa.
The question says, what about rototill when some is used in a small vegetable bed, maybe 8 foot by 12 foot?
Okay, I have clicked on the right thing now so I can see what you're saying. Yeah, again, rototilling, I hate to be as dramatic as I am, but rototilling really is a Category 5 hurricane coming right through your doorstep. And if you're a worm, if you're a sow bug, if you're whatever you are that's living in that soil. Now, if you have a raised bed and it's cut off from the earth below it, you know, it's got plastic there, or it's got landscaping fabric, and it's wood on all sides, you know, and there's no way for any kind of organisms to get in there. Well, now you're probably not killing any. You might be hurting your soil structure, but you're probably not killing any bugs because there's not any in there to begin with. So if you have a case like this, and feel free to argue with me, Lisa, but I think in a case like that, you probably aren't doing huge amounts of damage. But if I were you, I would try to get that plastic out of there, or drill holes through it, or do something to allow that soil life into that. And then it doesn't matter how big or how small it is. It really does just, you know, insects and that those organisms are just like we are. They want a home, they want a place to live. And so they'll find an air pocket in there, or whatever they need. And that's their home now. And when you come through with a rototiller, you just blow it up. And now it's pulverized soil. And again, you wet pulverized soil, you have mud, you dry it out, you have a brick, and nothing can live in a brick. Nothing can grow through a brick. So that's my opinion on it.
Yeah. I think the other thing we can add to the conversation about how rototilling impacts it is, as you're rototilling and disturbing that soil, you're introducing oxygen into that soil profile. And that stimulates a certain kind of bacteria, certain group of bacteria that then starts to break down your organic matter. So when we're talking about these techniques, and one of the most important things you can do is try to improve your levels of organic matter in the soil by adding compost or manure, as you're doing. So by aerating and turning over that soil, you may actually be starting to eat away and lose some of that organic matter that you've been trying to build up, because it does stimulate a different group of microbes that feed on that and release that carbon out of that freshly tilled soil. So I have raised beds. I don't do the plastic underneath it, Kevin. So, you know, I think my worms are free to come and go as they choose. And I've been able to manage without rototilling at all. In the fall, I'll just come through and I'll clip my plants right at that soil level. I don't even pull them up by the roots and disturb it. I leave those roots in place.
Yep.
And I do remove my tops, Kevin, but I've got those black plastic composting bins. So I'll use my crop residue from my gardens and I'll put it in my composting bins and cycle through that way. And then, so I'm very cautious about minimizing that soil amount of soil disturbance that I have. And when I'm planting my cover crops, I'm just broadcasting, you know, scattering those cover crops right on top. And then I'll take my garden rake and just real lightly scratch the surface of my beds to get some seed to soil contact for those covers. And they come up real well for me every year, you know, especially if I can do it earlier in the fall with some warm temperatures and we get some moisture.
Right.
So, all right. Let me
Just walk down through these. Use on established perennial bed. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's just exactly what I did around my garage and stuff is just that. And the one thing that we didn't hit on yet is how hot your soils can get. And a lot of the microbes and stuff like that and earthworms do not like hot soil. And we've had thermometers stuck in the ground where, you know, they get above 100 degrees in the hot summer sun, and they will not do that when they are mulched. So, and plants even don't like, you know, when it gets that hot, I'm sure you can see even your plants even in your perennial flower bed, they kind of, you know, some of them just don't like that. And so it'll actually protect them in many different ways by putting that mulch around them, both heat, moisture, you know, it protects them in a number of different ways.
I've got a follow-up question. Can you clarify the carbon to nitrogen ratio when it comes to hay? You've mentioned those differences between hay and straw.
Yep. And I'm probably going to be a little off here. And if you know the exact numbers, Lisa, you can chime in. So there is a little bit of a difference, even I believe, between legumes and grass hay. Okay, so legume is probably going to be less carbon to nitrogen. So and then what happens too is the more mature that plant gets, the more carbon is put into that plant. So if you took an immature, let's go with Lisa's garden that she planted some clover in, and the clover got through until next year, and then somehow she could kill that and get that back in, degrading back into the soil. That carbon to nitrogen ratio is going to be extremely low. It might be, I don't know, 10 to 1. It's going to be really low, and the microbes are going to be able to really chew that up, and spit that out as nitrogen pretty quickly, and there's going to be a really quick turnaround. If you harvest hay when most people harvest hay for dairy feed, it's probably going to be 20 to 1 in that range, a little bit, 25 to 1. If you let it go past prime, I think it gets up into the 35 to maybe even 40 to 1. Straw, again, Lisa chime in, I think is maybe even 100 and some, or maybe 200.
Yeah, I was going to say 81 maybe.
Okay, 80 to 1. So it's a gradual scale of just depending on how mature that stuff is. So there's no real easy answer to that. But I think, and I'm sure you do know this one, Lisa. So what is soil life like? That's around the 25 to 1, I believe.
Yeah, 20 to 25 to 1. Yep.
Right. So anything less than that is going to be like, bam, it's there right now for everything to feed off of. And if it's anything above 25 to 1, it's going to tie some nitrogen up until it degrades. And so when you get to 100 to 1, it's going to tie a lot of nitrogen up. Wood chips, I think they're the ones that get up into the 200, 250 to 1. So that's really going to take a lot of nitrogen to break that stuff down. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit, but it is on a gradual scale depending on the maturity. So the easy way to remember that, here's my easy way to remember it. And it sounds stupid, but it kind of is the truth, is the harder that plant is, literally, the harder it is, the more carbon is in it. So lush hay, mature hay, straw, and trees. The harder it is, the more carbon it has in, the more nitrogen it's going to tie up as it degrades.
Yeah, that's an excellent rule of thumb, Kevin. A way to make it relatable. Yep. So kind of keeping on the theme of this discussion, two related questions, but what about pine needles? I know pine needles sometimes can be a little more acidic of a material. And then we have a question about, you mentioned maybe using sawdust as part of the mulch. And are there certain kinds of sawdust that may be toxic to some of the vegetables?
Right. Be careful. I hear what you're saying. I've heard the pine needle theory a number of times. I also had one coworker that has retired from down here that used to do a lot of gardening, and she said pine needles. Now, she was composting them, but composted pine needles make the best mulch in the world. So, and again, the guy that has kind of mentored me through this whole thing, every year he just tries different things. Lisa knows that these guys that we've brought into our big soil health conference meetings, these guys tell all of us, if we don't fail at least 3 things a year, we haven't done our job. So, right? So, yeah. So I would tell you, now again, don't do this on a large scale, because I don't want your whole garden failing because pine needles weren't, something you should put on there. But if you have a really good source of pine needles and you have that every year, I would say, for heaven's sakes, do a small corner in the garden that maybe you can play around with and see what happens. Again, he planted, I wish I had a picture of it, but he planted a tomato plant in the top. He just took a wire mesh thing and made it about this big around, and he put it on the ground and he filled it with 2 foot of wood chips, and he planted a tomato plant on the top of it. And I don't think he cared what wood chip, getting to your sawdust question, I don't think he cared about what kind of sawdust or wood chip was in it. It was one of those things that's not supposed to work. And the day we were there, this huge tomato plant was growing out of the top of it, and it looked fantastic. So, you know, sometimes what I'm going to tell you, or even maybe what you're going to find, is completely different than what some of the, you know, the researchers and the professors have told you. And I go back to the fact that I think, and this is just me, and I could be way off base on this, but I think that when you have a really healthy soil, that healthy soil knows what it needs, right? It knows the pH that it needs. It knows some of the nutrients that it needs, and it can either manufacture some of that, or it can release some of that, or it can kind of take care of itself. So, so that's a really long answer to a question that I would say I don't know. But you're right. I've heard all those issues out there that you can't use this kind of sawdust and you can't use that. And I was told for years you couldn't use fresh ground up, you know, debark and stuff. And I've seen that used. I've seen everything work that's not supposed to work. So for heaven's sakes, don't do it on a grand scale. But if you have a really good source of something and you want to try to use it, use it. Just do it in a small area to kind of get your feet wet first. And again, if it's sawdust and it's from the local mill and you have no idea what it is, go ahead and try it. There probably are people out there that'll tell you it is toxic to them, and maybe it is. I know are different pHs that sawdust can create, and that's going to maybe affect your plants. But I'm not well versed enough in it. And again, for any of these questions that I don't answer correctly or I don't answer well enough, call me and I can get you in touch with the guy that's helping me, and he may know the answer to some of them too.
All right. And I like that you're making the point several times here to start small, you know, and not jump wholeheartedly into this. Because there's value, you know, you're going to learn something new every year and be tweaking your system until you get it right. So starting small is critical. We have a question about somebody's getting ready to plant some garlic and needs to disturb the soil just a bit, not full tillage. Is there another way to plant bulbs without that disturbance?
Again, I probably would have to refer you to the guy that's helped me. If I had to guess, I know I've talked to him once or twice about it, and I apologize for not having a good answer right off the top of my head as to what that is. I don't think there is. I think you want to do as minimal of disturbance as you can, and then I'm pretty sure that with garlic and stuff, I believe that you can put a reasonably decent amount of mulch over top of that to help with weed problems and stuff like that, because I believe that the bulb is big enough that it will come up through that. So I think you can put maybe not 6 inches, but maybe a couple inches of some light mulch over top of that. But I don't know, I can give you my information at the end or whatever, or you can get a hold of Stroud and they can give it to you to get a hold of me. But that would be probably the direction I would go, is I could call and ask him and get back to you, because I would hate to give you the wrong answer. But I know that, again, as minimal soil disturbance as you possibly can. And then again, I think you want to just kind of a little bit of mulch, but not too much.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important to emphasize, we're not talking about no soil disturbance. We recognize you've got to dig some holes to put those transplants in. I think the concept of this style of farming is you don't have to rototill the entire bed just to plant little 4x4 pots, or even smaller. So we recognize you still got to get those crops in the ground, the seeds in the ground. It's just about minimizing that small area of disturbance and not the entire garden to get your plantings in.
Yeah, let's take that one step further, because I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, if we have a seed that, I'm sure you can't see this on the screen, but if we, how big seeds are, if we have a seed that's that big and it can only germinate up to 5 times its thickness in the soil, why in the world are we rototilling 8 inches of ground? Or again, in production ag, why in the world are we plowing 8 inches of ground to put a seed in that is almost microscopic. It does not make any sense. So yeah, you know, do what little tiny tillage you need to do, but all the rest of it you don't have to disturb is going to have all that biology right there to come
Yes.
swarming in immediately after you get done with that little light tillage. So excellent point, Lisa. Yeah, no, it still amazes me why we're plowing 8 inches for that top little tiny bit.
Yeah, yeah. All right, we're wrapping up. So if folks have some last minute questions to get into either the Q&A or the chat, we're looking at both right now.
I do see
please.
one. I do see
Yep.
one here from Bruce that says, if you do a cover crop, how do you turn that in before planting? And I don't know if we've answered that well enough for him or if he's still on. So you're first of all, if I understand your question right, you're not going to turn that in, right? I mean, there are people, don't get me wrong, there are people out there that grow a really nice cover crop and then they till that into the soil. And you can get some benefits from still having that cover crop there. I won't say that you won't, but we don't want to turn that in, right? What we want to do, and Lisa alluded to this even when she's cutting it, is depending on your circumstances, you would let that cover crop grow to whenever you need to start planting your crop. And then you would terminate that. And I know people, you know, can get excited about sprays, but you know, you could spray it, you could cut it like Lisa does. You can roll and crimp it, which at the right stage works well. There's a number of ways that you can terminate that. But what we would like to see you do is terminate it and then just lay it down. So now that it becomes your mulch, and you're going to mulch your ground, and it's going to decompose slower so that it feeds that all year long. So we're not even really wanting you to turn that in. You're going to lay that down on top of the ground and then plant through that.
Yeah, excellent. You know, and Kevin talked about, if you've heard the term green manure, that's what Kevin just described about having that green cover in the spring and then plowing that in and mixing it with the soil. That's often termed green manure. So.
And I seen a comment by Lamont, if he's still on here. And, you know, it's funny. You're absolutely right. You know, Gardening Without Work by Ruth Stout, and my mentor will bring that out. You know, every time we ask him a question, it's just Ruth Stout. And I seen a video where she was walking over top of this hay like that we have out, and she's taking potatoes and she's cutting them and flinging them and cutting them and flinging them. And she just planted her potatoes. That's all she did. She cut and flung them into the hay and she walked off. This isn't new stuff, and I don't know, even Lisa can attest to some of the stuff that we do in production ag. Some of these books were published in the 40s and 50s, and we're reinventing the wheel now because, I don't know, somehow we forgot all this, I guess. The one thing I'll tell you, for anybody that's on here, I'm going to get on a soapbox just for a second. Why doesn't anybody promote this kind of gardening? And I'm just gonna be quiet for 10 seconds and let you think about that. Why doesn't anybody promote this kind of gardening? Okay, that's probably not 10 seconds, but here's the answer. Because nobody has anything to gain from it except you. Nobody's selling you a rototiller. Nobody's selling you the weed gardening, whatever you're gonna pull your weeds out with. Nobody's selling you anything. And I came from the sales world, and I get appalled at all the stuff that we think we need to sell anymore. But the same goes even for no-till conventional ag. If we're no-till, we get to sell you a planter maybe, and we get to sell you a tractor, and that's it. If you're tillage, man, we got plows and discs and vertical till and planters, and we got the gamut that we can sell you. And so I firmly believe that the reason that you don't hear a lot of this, and maybe that's why Ruth can publish her book in 1961, and by now we've completely forgotten about it because nobody is going to push this kind of gardening because nobody's making any money at it. We can, because we're the conservation district, and it makes a lot of sense with soil and soil health and all that. But you know, the only one that's selling you anything for this is the person that sold you the plant. There's a whole lot of, you know, fertilizers. We don't use any of them, but there's fertilizers and sprays and rototillers and weed, whatever you want to call them. There's all this kind of stuff that revolves around getting you guys to have to battle weeds and have to water your plants, hoses and sprinklers and all this stuff that goes into it that people want to sell you that you don't need if you do it the right way. But nobody's going to promote that because now I've got nothing to sell you. I'll get off my soapbox.
It's easy for me to get on my soapbox sometimes too, Kevin. So we like your passion. Yeah. So we do have one more question that came in from Joan. Sounds like maybe not exactly garden related, but she's got a large area, 160 by 30 feet of in her grass that's poor drainage and it's not infiltrate well and it's low in phosphorus. So how do I get this suitable to plant natives into?
Okay. Go through those high points real slow, just one more time.
All right. And I have maybe something too I can chime in.
Okay. Poor drainage.
So a pretty large area, 30 feet by 160 feet. It's in grass right now, but it's got poor drainage that does not infiltrate and it's low in phosphorus. So how does she get this suitable to plant some natives into?
Well, we've talked about some of it would be organic matter. We'll go back to getting some organic matter in the soil somehow. Maybe you try planting some of the natives with some mulch on it. One question I would have, and again, everybody has all kinds of different viewpoints in this day and age, and I don't want to step on any toes. One thing I would tell you that typically if you have some really well-growing grass, and I mean good growing grass, the infiltration should be pretty decent just because there's a good grass system there and there's a good root system there. And if there's not, there's a problem with that already. So the one thing that we've learned is that in pastures, we've learned that if your hay above the ground is this tall, your roots are about that tall. If the hay above your ground is this tall, your roots have probably went in the ground that tall, or wouldn't be tall, but deep. So the one thing I'd say is if you're continually mowing that and keeping that trimmed right down to, and again, go back to my comment of, the only creature that likes things neat and tidy are humans. Maybe I missed that because I might skip that, but I heard somebody say that one time. The only thing that likes things neat and tidy are us. Animals like things messy. Everything else out there likes things messy. So anyway, so maybe you don't want to let this grass grow because it's going to look messy, right? But the taller that grass grows, the deeper the roots go. I also have, and this is, I'd like to send this maybe picture to Stroud. I have a driveway that has a rubber diversion into it that kicks all of my water that comes down my driveway off into my lawn. And I live on a hill with poor drained soil. And the only thing I can think of is, excuse me, there's a great big black walnut tree that stands there. And I can show you a picture of water coming out of my driveway that's 1.5 feet wide and 2 inches deep. And it completely disappears into my lawn, within the first foot of going into my lawn. It's amazing to see it. I don't know, going back to this question, I don't know what the difference is between where you are and where I am. Maybe that tree is something that helps. So maybe you could plant a tree there long term. I mean, that's going to be long way down the road. Let the grass grow a little taller. And the reason I said I don't want to step on any toes is the one thing that I myself am a big fan of, and I probably shouldn't even say this, is nitrogen, fertilizer. Nitrogen, especially on grasses and stuff, just makes all the difference in the world. It is night and day. And so if that grass wasn't growing well, I wouldn't probably be, you could put some phosphorus on it if you wanted to, but I wouldn't even be as big on phosphorus as I would on getting some nitrogen on there to really stimulate that growth. And if you're going to do that, contact me or contact somebody that, that knows a lot about fertilizer, because it doesn't take very much. And I don't want you to be upset that, it grew so fast that you couldn't control it, because it will do that. But maybe a little bit of nitrogen fertilizer, and I'll be quiet. And Lisa, whatever you wanted to add, you can certainly add to that. I'm not really sure. Without seeing it, I don't really know as I can answer it well.
Yeah, and it is tough without seeing it. And I'll maybe give a slightly different perspective from Kevin, but Kevin had some great recommendations. But perhaps it's time to maybe give up on that section of the lawn and kind of embrace the fact that that's a natural wet area. You know, I think as humans, we try to manipulate and force nature and change the conditions to grow what we want to do. But sometimes there's value in just working with nature and fostering and choosing certain plants that like those wet conditions. So I've got a wet spot in my backyard where a spring comes up and it used to be grass, and I gave up on it, and I have turned it into this little beautiful patch of wetland species that I love. So a lot of the nurseries, swamp milkweed is a type of milkweed that would be great for the monarch butterflies and the pollinators that likes wet feet. There's plants called Joe Pye weed that do well in wet conditions. I've planted button bush and some silky dogwoods around the outside. But what I've also found by just letting that, quit mowing and letting that area come up, is I get some natural plants that come in. There's a narrow blade. There's a species of goldenrod that does really well in wet conditions that has naturally come into my yard. I get these purple asters. So instead of trying to maybe continually battle nature in this section of your yard, you know, maybe start small, like Kevin suggested, you know, but maybe kind of embrace those conditions that you have. And you've got a really good opportunity to create some pollinator habitat in that section of the yard.
And just let me say, forget everything I just said and listen to what Lisa just said. You know, sometimes we get tunnel vision, you know, and we think about, you know, only that one thing, but she's exactly right. And again, the only creature that likes things clean and beautiful, or clean and neat, are humans. So you start adding those things, not only do you get some native stuff potentially coming, but now with the Joe Pye stuff, you've got butterflies, you know, you've probably got some bees for pollinators. You know, no creatures really like nice, clean, well manicured, beautiful lawns. They all they need pollinator stuff, and they need all this kind of stuff. So again, I know sometimes it's a huge ask to get over, just like it's a huge ask to have a beautiful looking garden, what we consider beautiful, and we turn it into a bed of hay and stuff, and it's like, oh, that's really ugly. Well, it's in the eye of the beholder. And so going back to your comments, Lisa, I agree 1,000%, is that, you know, if we can get over that hump and start looking at some of that stuff. Yeah, Joe Pye weed is a beautiful plant, and there's some really nice looking plants that you could plant there and have, you know, just a wonderful, you know, wetland garden, and that would actually should in the long run help your infiltration even more yet, because it has all those roots in there. So that actually is an excellent idea. Yes, absolutely.
All right, I am so pleased to see that 18 folks are still on the line, Kevin. So I think that says a lot for the quality of your talk that we do. I'm not seeing any additional questions coming in, but thank you.
Right here, just, and maybe I'm clicking on, because I clicked on questions and chat. Okay. The last one real quick, because a heavy cover of hay to help invasives such as English ivy from coming up. I would guess it would have to. I'm terrible at names. I'm going to say that's Marcella. I think it would have to, only again because, you know, plants need to have sunshine to create photosynthesis, and if you can keep that out of where it gets any sunshine, it should kill it. So yeah, I would at least try. You know, if it creeps out from underneath the bottom of it on a side or something, well, now all bets are off because it's going to get some sunshine. But yeah, I think from what I've seen, if you put it in there heavy enough, it takes care of any weed. So I hit that one real quick. So.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for covering that. I missed that one. So, all right. Thank you, Kevin, for taking the extra time. I think, you know, a lot of value comes out of this Q&A and this interactive part of the webinar that folks can get. So clearly there was a lot of interest in the topic. You did a great job covering everything. And thank you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us and your experience.
Yep, thanks for having me. And again, if you may have to go through Lisa or Stroud, but if anybody wants to get a hold of me, I'm more than interested in talking with you. And if I need to go to my mentor to get some questions answered, he loves to talk about it too. So we will get you any answers that we haven't covered already. Absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you.
And just to remind you, Kevin is at the Bradford County Conservation District. So just if you Google your website, Kevin, right, they'll
Sure.
be able to get a phone number and some contact information for
Bradford
you.
County. Yep. Mhm.
Bradford County Conservation District
Yep.
website. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to sign off. Thank you, Kevin, so much for today.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Yeah, appreciate it.
See ya.